Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I'm your host, Angie Grandt, the parent coach. I focus on trauma, disrupted attachments, connection, and really, quite honestly, I am on a mission to break cycles of trauma because when I look at what's happening in the world today, I know that I have to do my part, and quite frankly, it's in my design to disrupt these cycles of trauma. And it starts with you. It starts with you here listening and learning key practical strategies to show up different for yourself, show up different for the kids in your life, and to help break the cycles of us giving feedback or getting feedback that we're less than who we're supposed to be. I think that all of that starts with understanding our human design. I know for me and many, many, many people in my life, it has been a powerful game changer to really get back on track with our purpose. So anyways, without any more of that, I want to talk today about when our kids leave us with this feeling like perhaps there's something wrong with them. Perhaps they don't understand. Perhaps they're not smart enough or capable enough. I know in my home, this was something I experienced pretty early on, pretty shortly after adoption. I don't know, my son had been with us for a few months, and I knew he was very, very bright. He had a lot to share with the world and so many things to say, but I would give him simple directions, and they were a real struggle for him to follow through with. And I didn't get the impression that he was trying to be defiant or that he didn't want to follow through. And I say that because I would give an instruction and then he would stop and he would look at me as if he wanted me to repeat it, or he would ask me to repeat it. And he'd say, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, or where is that? Or sometimes he wouldn't say anything and he would just get halfway to the thing and then he'd wander off. And I started to look at this and wonder, what in the world is going on? I see this child who's so bright, yet seems so incapable of doing what I thought were simple things. And I used my tools that I had in my tool bag to break instructions down and, really be mindful about the words I used and to not add unnecessary words to my instructions. I was very mindful about the way I was presenting instructions, and I would provide different levels of prompting to try to support his success, yet we'd be right back at the same place. Nothing I was doing was working or having an impact. And I really started to question, maybe he doesn't understand, maybe he can't process information, maybe something happened with his wiring that has had this huge impact on his ability to understand. So I, in my relentless pursuit to try to help my son, sought out neuropsychological testing. And this indeed confirmed that he is very bright. In some areas, he scored above average, yet he couldn't follow simple instructions. I didn't understand. I really struggled to understand why this was. Why was following simple instructions so challenging? So of course I asked his therapist therapist to help me understand. And the explanation that I was given was that when a child is in a high state of arousal, even when the threat of danger has long gone, that our kids can often continue, and adults can often continue to be in this high state of arousal. And when this happens, the blood flow isn't going efficiently to the front part of the brain that is responsible for processing information, because the blood flow is going to the survival part of the brain, which doesn't really process information in the same way. It doesn't process auditory information. It processes instinctual information. And so asking a child to, go to a room and get a cookie sheet, go to the kitchen and get a cookie sheet, that there's nothing instinctual about that. That very much requires that higher level auditory processing. And so I thought, okay, that's great, but I didn't know what to do about it. The solution was to continue therapy. And over the years, we continued therapy at lots of different levels. I didn't really see the needle shift a ton until many years later. So I still kept wondering, that couldn't have possibly been the only solution. While I don't disagree at all, when a child has experienced trauma, helping that brain, the part of the brain that's in this constant state of arousal, that's constantly in prep mode to fight, flight, or free, that's not healthy in so many ways. It has a huge impact on the health of our body and a huge impact on our ability to engage in higher level cognitive processes. I don't disagree with that at all. I know that that was part of my son's experience, and for other people who have experienced trauma. I don't question that at all. But I wanted then to have better tools to approach him, right? Because that trauma piece can't just be healed overnight. That helping him feel safe isn't a quick fix. That takes time and persistence and really understanding how to show up for our kids, which that's what I'm here to help you do. But I did want to give you just a slightly different way to also look at it. So I strongly believe we still have to look at that behavior where our kids seem incapable of something we feel like they should be able to do. I want to give us a bit of a different lens to look at that through. And in my recent studies and going through becoming a certified parent coach, one of the things that we talked in there is something called mistaken motivations. So mistaken motivations has been around for quite some time. It's nothing new, but it's not widely talked about in, at least in all of the parenting, the behavioral treatment that I've learned, all of the different ways that I've learned to look at our kids' behaviors. Mistaken motivations was not one of them. And when I started to learn about this, and I'm going to share a little bit with you today, I thought, oh, that makes so much sense. So let's talk about what mistaken motivations are. Well, ultimately, a mistaken motivation is an unmet energy need. Our kids have all kinds of energy needs. We all do, right? We have these needs to meet our energy needs, whether we're thinking about our emotional energy, our survival energy, our energy of self-love, our willpower energy. We have all of these different types of energy that we need fulfilled. And when our kids' energy needs are not being met, they will do things to try to meet their energy needs. They're not trying to misbehave. They're not trying to drive us crazy. They're just trying to meet these energy needs, and they don't know how to do it in a productive way that is well communicated to the people in their life. So instead, what our kids do are things such as the mistaken motivation of inadequacy. But the key thing with mistaken motivations is that when we're looking at behaviors through this lens of mistaken motivations, there's a very key, powerful difference in how we look at behaviors through this lens. And here's the difference. In all of my training about behaviors, all of my training about trying to understand, it was always about looking at the behavior. When we're talking about trauma, I'm really encouraging you to take a step back from that behavior and look at it through the lens of what's happened to your child and what they might be experiencing. But mistaken motivations takes even a different look. Mistaken motivations looks at how you, as the parent, feel about what your child's doing. And this is really key because when we think about the energy exchange that happens between us and our kids and how the way that our kids are behaving has one impact on me, for example, but a very different impact on a person in my co-parenting relationship, right? I would experience this time and time again where my child would do something, do a behavior, and I would have one response to it, but their father would have a different response, or their stepdad would have a different response even yet, or their teacher would have a very different response, which got me thinking there has to be something about the other person in this behavior relationship. So when we're talking about the mistaken motivation of inadequacy, I'm going to talk a little bit about what that behavior might look like, but I want you to keep in your mind, it's actually about how it feels to us as the person on the other end of the behavior. Because one behavior might trigger the mistaken motivation of inadequacy in one caregiver and might trigger the mistaken motivation of power in another, right? So a child could engage in one behavior and one parent might feel the need to overpower them, where the other parent might feel the need to help them. Does that make sense? All right, so let's talk about this. So when our kids are engaging in the mistaken motivation of inadequacy, oftentimes what we'll see is a kiddo who acts helpless, like they can't do things, or they might even say, I can't. With that mistaken motivation of inadequacy, our kids might feel stupid in comparison to others. They themselves might feel inadequate or feel like they're not good enough. Oftentimes, with this mistaken motivation, our kids will give up and they won't participate in activities. They might try, start out the football season, but then after a couple of weeks, come up with an excuse about why they can't stay there. They might act like they just want to be left alone because then when you look at it from their eyes, if they just keep to themselves, then nobody else can see how inadequate they feel that they are. And it's also really common in people who are displaying the mistaken motivation of inadequacy. It's highly likely that they'll set goals that are too high and they just won't do anything that will measure up to these goals. So they'll set a goal that is just out of their reach and then throw up their hands like, see, I couldn't reach my goal. I must be inadequate, is essentially what they're saying. Maybe not with so many words, but that's the idea, right? And so then how do we as parents react to that? Well, many of us will try a wide variety of approaches and feel discouraged. And if you've been hanging out here with me at all since we started this podcast and you've listened to my stories, I feel so strongly that we had the mistaken motivation the mistaken motivation of inadequacy going on in my home because I tried everything under the sun and I felt so discouraged because nothing was working. Nothing. We as parents will often coax or remind or use lots of incentives to try to get our kids to do the things that we want them to do. And again, this was exactly my experience. I tried so many different reward charts and chore charts and reward systems without charts and reminders and surprise rewards and all of these things trying to set my child up for success. And again, felt very discouraged and defeated. So then I gave up trying, which is super common when we're experiencing that mistake motivation of inadequacy. When we give up trying, then we really limit the demands that we place on our kids. And oftentimes we'll start doing things for our kids that they could be doing for themselves. That's our experience when we're stuck in this mistaken motivation. There are a few markers in your child's human design chart that make it more likely that they are going to experience the mistaken motivation of inadequacy, but this is not a end all be all, and there are lots of things in our charts. But if a child has a few centers, if any of them are open, that can really impact their sense of self-worth and their ability to really step up and lead to that mistake motivation of inadequacy. So the spleen, root, head, and the G center, if any of those are open. Also, if your kiddo has just any gates on the sensing circuit, which is part of an individual circuit, those things can also lead to the mistaken motivation of inadequacy. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about these open centers or that sensing circuit, then let's book a reading so you understand your kiddo better if these are things you're experiencing in your home. So some things that you can do, some practical things that you can do with your kiddo who's experiencing this mistaken motivation of inadequacy is make sure that you don't get frustrated. I know that that's easier said than done, but staying friendly and encouraging with your child is really important when they're feeling inadequate. Talk with your child about what they believe about themselves. And if they're old enough, talk about their sense of self-worth. Make sure that you're encouraging your kiddo instead of praise. That's something that I did a ton of. Praise was my jam, but really encouraging instead of praise, but don't rescue them. Remind them of their value and their worth. Celebrate those little successes. Teach them to say nice things to themselves too. And it's really key that we say nice things to ourselves so that we can show that to our kids, so that they learn that skill from us. And then the last kind of tip that I have for you is break things down into small manageable tasks so that your child can feel more success, so that you can, provide that encouragement and you can help model that positive self-talk, helping to make things as doable as possible for your kiddo while they're working on establishing their sense of self-worth is really key to tackling the mistaken motivation of inadequacy. So if this is something that you're experiencing in your home and you want some personalized practical tools to start shifting this behavior in your home, please, please, please book. I invite you to book a consult with me. If you want to understand your or your kiddo's human design better, book a reading and message me. So you can go to my website, send me a message and say, hey, I listened to the podcast episode about inadequacy and I love the discount code to book a reading. Because you shouldn't have to pay full price. If you're here hanging out with me, we're already friends. So, so send me a message. I'd love to send you that discount code. And I'm so confident that understanding your kiddo better will lead to less behaviors, less frustration on your end, less disconnect, and more time connecting. So I cannot wait to chat with you and connect with you. So talk soon. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.